October 1944, and you are sitting at 12,000 feet over a stretch of flat German farmland near a town called Achmer. You have been circling this same patch of sky for 40 minutes, throttled back, watching one long concrete runway through a gap in the cloud. You are the pilot of a P-51 Mustang, and you are not up here to look for a fight in the open air. You are up here to wait. Somewhere below you, on that airfield, sits the fastest fighter in the world. It is a Messerschmitt Me-262, a twin-engine jet that flies more than 100 miles an hour faster than anything you have. If it climbs to your height with speed already built into it, there is nothing you can do. Your Mustang cannot chase it and cannot force it to turn and fight. In level flight, it simply pulls away and is gone in seconds. So you do not try to beat it in level flight. Your moment is the 2 minutes when it cannot be fast. You wait for it to come home. This is the story of how a propeller fighter beat a jet it could never catch and never outclimb. The Mustang won by finding the one place and the one moment where all that speed was worth nothing, and by being there when it happened. The answer was the airfield. Everything turned on the landing. And the men who worked it out called the job, with grim humor, rat-catching. The jet came first, and it was frightening in a way you have to feel before the answer means anything. When the Me-262 first showed up over Germany in the summer of 1944, it broke the rules that every Allied pilot had been trained on. A Mustang at its best did something close to 437 miles an hour. The 262, flat out, did around 540. That gap of 100 miles an hour does not sound like much when you say it out loud. In the air, it is everything. It meant the German pilot chose when the fight started and when it ended. He could dive out of the sun, pick his target, and be gone before a Mustang could even bring its nose around to point at him. And when he did bring his guns to bear, they were devastating to a bomber. The 262 carried 4 30mm cannon packed into its nose. These were not the fast, light machine guns of a dogfighter. They were short-ranged and slow-firing, but each shell was a small bomb. Only a handful of hits would tear the wing off a heavy bomber. Later jets carried a rack of small unguided rockets slung under the wings, fired in a single spread from beyond the range of a bomber's own guns, meant to break a whole formation apart in one pass. A pilot could come screaming through a box of flying fortresses at a speed their gunners had never had to track before, fire once, and climb away untouched. For the men flying the American bombers, and for the Mustang pilots flying alongside them, this was a genuinely bad problem. The whole American daylight campaign rested on one idea, that long-range fighters could escort the bombers all the way to the target and protect. The Mustang had won that argument in early 1944, when it flew the whole way to Berlin and back, more than 1,000 miles, on internal fuel and a pair of drop tanks. Could go where the bombers went and stay with them over the target. That was the promise. The jet threatened to break it. An escort fighter that cannot catch the interceptor is not much of an escort. For the men in the bombers, the jet changed the feel of every mission over Germany. A gunner in a flying fortress had trained to track a fighter making 400 miles an hour across his sights. The 262 came through at better than 500, closing the gap so fast that a gunner could barely swing his guns onto it before it was past him and gone, its cannon shells already on the way. The escort Mustangs stacked around the bomber stream would see a grey shape flash through the formation and watch a bomber stagger and fall out of line. They had nothing to shoot at. The thing that had done it was already 2 miles away and climbing. A Mustang pilot could do everything right, be in exactly the correct place, and still be a spectator, a hard thing to carry home mission after mission. The gap was pure arithmetic. On paper, the Americans had no answer. Nothing with a propeller was going to catch a 262 in a straight line, and no amount of pilot skill changes arithmetic. You cannot dive on a man who is already faster than you in level flight and above you. Test the idea in your head and it falls apart every time. The German pilot only had to keep his speed up and keep moving, and he was safe. But that was the trick in the words. Keep his speed up. Because there were 2 moments in every single flight when a 262 pilot could not keep his speed up, no matter how good he was, no matter how much he wanted to. He could not do it on takeoff, and he could not do it on landing. Understanding why means understanding the engines. The jet engines of 1944 were crude, hand-built, and desperately short-lived. On paper, a production engine was meant to run about 25 hours before it had to be pulled apart and overhauled. In hard use, on poor wartime metal, many of them lasted little more than 10 or 12 hours before they burned out or seized. A German jet pilot flew every mission on an engine that was one of a matched pair, that had cost a fortune in scarce alloy, and that might quit on him at any moment. And they did not respond the way a piston engine did. A Mustang pilot could firewall his throttle, and the Merlin up front would answer at once with a surge of power. A jet pilot could not. If he shoved the throttles forward too quickly, the engine would flame out or catch fire or simply tear itself apart. So he had to feed the power in slowly and gently over many long seconds, and during those seconds the aircraft was crawling. On takeoff, the 262 needed a very long run down the concrete to get airborne, wallowing along, gaining speed by the yard, its engines spooling up as fast as their pilot dared push them, which was not fast at all. On landing, it was worse. The jet came in heavy and fast, and had to be flown down onto a long approach with the wheels hanging out and the flaps down and the throttles almost closed. If the pilot got low and slow and suddenly needed power to go around again, the engines were too slow to answer. He was committed. For roughly 2 minutes at each end of every flight, the quickest aircraft Germany could put in the air became the slowest thing in the sky, low over its own field, unable to accelerate, unable to climb hard, unable to run. The Americans found the weakness the way you find most things in war, by paying for it and paying attention. Bomber escort pilots kept coming home with the same story. They had chased a jet and lost it. Then they watched it slide down toward an airfield to land, fat and slow and helpless, at the exact instant they no longer had the fuel or the height to do anything about it. One American pilot summed up what a 262 looked like in the landing pattern in 4 words. He called it meat on the table. Out of that came the tactic. If you cannot catch the jet in the air, you go to the place it has to return to, and you get there first, and you wait. You send your Mustangs to loiter over the German jet fields, high up, throttled back to save fuel, orbiting for as long as the tanks would let them, watching the runway. You waited for a jet to come home low on fuel with nowhere else to go. And the Mustang, for all that it could not match the jet's top speed, was the perfect tool for this particular job, because it could stay. Its enormous range meant it could sit over a German airfield deep inside Germany for a long time and still make it home. The very quality that made it a great escort, that it could go the distance, made it a great rat catcher too. The Germans knew all this too, and they poured resources into covering the one weakness they could not fix. At a major jet base like Rhine, they lined the approach paths with dense belts of light anti-aircraft guns, quick-firing 20mm cannon in 4-barrel mounts. Packed by the dozen along the lanes, the jets had to fly down to land. The idea was to build a wall of fire over the very ground where a 262 was slow and helpless, so that a Mustang diving in after a landing jet had to fly through a storm of shells to reach it. That is why the American accounts of these fights come back again and again to the flak, thick and close and accurate. The Germans had turned the approach to every jet field into a shooting gallery pointed at the Americans. It made the rat catching dangerous work. It did not make it stop. Now hold that picture in your mind and go back up to 12,000 feet over Achmer, because this is where the reversal happened, and it has a name attached to it and a date. The date is the 7th of October, 1944. Flying that day was a young lieutenant named Urban Drew of the American 361st Fighter Group in a Mustang he had named Detroit Miss. Drew was orbiting high over Achmer Airfield, one of the main bases of the 1st Jet Unit, when he looked down and saw 2 Mi-262s taxi out onto the runway to take off. He did exactly what the tactic said to do. You waited. He did not dive on them while they sat on the ground, where the airfield's own guns would be waiting for him. He held his altitude and let them roll, let them lift off, let them get airborne and committed. Wheels still coming up, engines still crawling toward speed. Then he rolled his Mustang over and came down on them out of the height he had been saving all morning. He took the second jet first. Its pilot had barely tucked his landing gear away when Drew's 650 caliber machine guns found him. The jet came apart. Drew hauled his Mustang around and went after the leader, who was faster now and turning, and he made a hard, high-angle shot, the kind that is mostly instinct, and the second jet rolled onto its back, spun down, and went into the ground. 2 jets, the fastest aircraft in the world, both brought down inside a couple of minutes by a single propeller fighter that could not have laid a glove on either of them in open air 1,000 feet higher. The The flak coming up from Achmer during all this was thick and close. Drew got away through it. His wingman, a young pilot named Robert McCandless, was not so lucky. He was hit and went down and was taken prisoner. And there is a bitter twist to the story that tells you something about how war actually records itself. Drew's gun camera had jammed. He had shot down 2 jets in front of God and the whole German airfield, and he could not prove a word of it. His own wingman, the one other man who had seen it, was now behind German wire. The army would not credit him with the 2 victories. It took decades. Well into the 1980s, the German and American records were finally laid side by side. The wrecks and the losses matched up to the day and the field. Only then was Urban Drew decorated for the 2 jets he had knocked down over Achmer that October morning. The record was always true. It just took 40 years for the paperwork to admit it. There is a detail about that October 7th that makes the whole thing sharper. The unit that owned Achmer, the very first outfit formed to fly the 262 in combat, was a hand-picked squadron built around one of Germany's greatest aces and named after him. The same day Drew took 2 of its jets down over the field. That unit was flying its first proper operations, claiming its opening victories, one of them a heavy bomber. So the German jet force and the American answer to it arrived on the very same day, over the very same runway. And the numbers from that first month tell you which one was winning. In its opening weeks, the unit claimed something on the order of 24 Allied aircraft shot down. In the same weeks, it lost roughly as many of its own jets. A large share of those went down without an enemy pilot ever firing, lost to accidents and to failing engines. The rest fell to the Mustangs waiting over the field for the moment the jets came home. A weapon that trades itself away at that rate is not winning, whatever its top speed says. What Drew did over Achmer became the standard American answer to the jet. Dozens of Mustang pilots ran the same play across that autumn and winter. 1 month later, on the 6th of November 1944, another Mustang pilot ran the same play. His name was Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group. Years later, he would be the first man to fly faster than sound, but on this day, he was a fighter pilot doing a fighter pilot's work. Yeager spotted a lone 262 coming back toward its field, low and slow, and he did not hesitate. We have his own words for it, because he wrote them down in his combat report that evening. He spotted the jet, he said, approaching the field from the south at 500 feet, and it was going very slow, about 200 miles an hour. Yeager rolled in on it, doing around 500 miles an hour, more than twice the jet's speed, coming down out of the height like a stone. In his report, he noted, flatly, that the flak started coming up very thick and accurate. He fired one short burst from about 400 yards, saw his rounds strike the jet's wings, and pulled away as the ground fire closed in. The 262 went down and crashed short of its own runway. Years afterward, Yeager described the fight with a shrug. The German was on final approach, he said. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell? That word sportsmanlike, is worth stopping on, because it tells you the Germans understood exactly what was being done to them and hated it. From a jet pilot's seat, it must have felt like an ambush every time he came home. And you can see they understood it in what they did about it. By the last months of the war, the Luftwaffe was forced to spend some of its very best remaining fighters and pilots doing nothing but guarding jets while they took off and landed. The most elite jet unit of the war, a squadron of aces led by the fighter general Adolf Galland, set up a special protection flight of propeller fighters, long-nosed Fokker, Wolf 190 Doris, for exactly this purpose. It was put in the hands of a lieutenant named Heinz Sachsenberg. Their whole job was to take off first, in pairs, climb over the field, and orbit above the runway to fend off the Mustangs while the jets came and went at their most helpless. These Fokker Wolves were painted with bright red undersides and white stripes, so that the German anti-aircraft gunners, jumpy and shooting at everything, would know not to fire on their own protectors. The colors were so loud that the Germans nicknamed the outfit the Parrot Squadron. Think about what that means. The Germans had built the fastest fighter in history, and to keep it alive they had to assign a screen of slower, older propeller planes to babysit it for the 2 minutes a Mustang might pounce. The jet's own speed could not protect it in the one place it mattered. That is the whole reversal, admitted in red paint on the belly of a Focke Wolf. The man who commanded that first jet unit knew the danger better than anyone because it took his own life. Walter Nowotny was one of the highest scoring fighter aces of the entire war, credited with more than 250 victories, and he had been handed the job of proving the jet in combat. On the 8th of November 1944, 2 days after Yeager's fight, Nowotny took off in his 262 and got into a running battle with American fighters over his own base. He was heard on the radio reporting a victory and then reporting that one of his engines had failed. Then his jet came down out of the sky near the field and was destroyed, and Nowotny did not survive it. To this day, the historians argue about the exact cause. Some say the Mustangs shot him down cleanly. Others say an engine quit at the worst possible moment and the jet was helpless without it, low and slow, with the American fighters right there. It may have been the guns, and it may have been the engine, and honestly, it may have been both, the one feeding the other. What is not in doubt is where it happened and why it was possible. The most advanced interceptor Germany ever fielded was lost within sight of his own runway, at low speed, exactly where the tactics said he would be vulnerable, and exactly where the Americans were waiting. Over the winter, the lone patrols grew into a deliberate campaign. American commanders stopped treating the jet as a problem to be solved in the air and started treating its airfields as the target. Whole fighter groups were sent to hunt the jet bases directly, to sweep the sky above them, and to work the ground over with bombs and gunfire. There was a second reason the airfield was the right place to fight, beyond the slow landings. The 262 needed an unusually long, smooth run of concrete to get airborne at all, far longer than a piston fighter. Crater that runway, and ye did not even have to shoot a jet down. You could pin it on the ground with nowhere to launch from, or force it onto a short, damaged strip where a heavy, fast landing would wreck it without a shot fired. The Germans answered by dispersing the jets, hiding them under the trees along the taxiways, painting them over, moving them only when they had to. It bought a little time, and it did not solve anything, because a jet still had to come out to that one long strip of concrete to fly, and the Mustangs knew exactly where it was. If you want a single number that settles the argument about whether the rat catching worked, here it is. Across the whole war, more Me-262s were destroyed on the ground and in the landing pattern than were ever shot down in honest air-to-air combat where the jet had its speed. They were caught by strafing runs on their airfields and by fighters lurking over their fields in the moments the jet was slow. On 2 airfields alone, in the space of a few weeks early in 1945, Allied pilots claimed something close to 90 jets destroyed. Of the roughly 1,400 262s that Germany managed to build, only a fraction ever reached a fight, and a great many of those were lost not to a faster enemy, but to their own weakness at the 2 ends of every flight. The Germans built a war-winning aircraft and then spent it, a few at a time, in the 2 minutes it could not defend itself. The pattern held right to the end. On the 10th of April 1945, with the war only weeks from over, a German ace named Walter Schuck took his 262 up into a stream of American bombers. He shot several of them down in a matter of minutes, one pass after another, doing exactly what the jet was built to do. Schuck was one of the great fighter pilots of the war, with well over 100 victories to his name, and up at bomber height in a jet he was almost untouchable. But a jet has to come down. A young American Mustang pilot named Joseph Peterbers caught Schuck's 262 as its speed bled away, hit it, and forced the German to take to his parachute. Both men lived. 60 years later, as old men, the American who had shot the jet down and the German who had flown it met face to face and became friends. The last act of the story is 2 veterans shaking hands, but the lesson in it is the same one Drew learned over Achmer in the autumn of 1944. Speed at altitude was worth everything. Speed on the way down was worth nothing. The Americans had learned, painfully and permanently, to fight the jet only in the second place and never in the first. So return one last time to that Mustang at 12,000 feet over the German farmland, throttled back, orbiting, watching the runway. That pilot had made his peace with a hard truth. He was flying an aircraft that could not win the race. He knew it, and his enemy knew it, and it did not matter, because he had stopped trying to win the race. He had figured out that a machine is only as fast as the slowest part of its job, and the slowest part of a jet's job was coming home. So he did not chase. He waited over the doorstep, high and patient, for the fastest fighter in the world to slow down and become the easiest target in the sky. The jet never got faster. It never had to. The Mustang just refused to fight it anywhere except the one place it was slow, and that was enough to break it. The Me-262 was a glimpse of the future, and everyone who saw one knew it. Every jet fighter that came after it owes it something. But in the autumn of 1944, it met an older, slower aircraft flown by men who had thought harder about the problem than the machine's designers had. And those men found the one crack in it and drove a Mustang straight through. Too fast to catch, and it did not matter. They stopped trying to catch it and brought it down where it was slow. The Mustang brought the fastest fighter in the world down where it was slow. Now I want to hear from you. Did you ever crew a Mustang or work on one, or does one sit in a hangar near you now that you have stood under and looked up at? And which jewel should we put under the lens next? Tell me in the comments below. If you want more stories of the American weapons that answered the ones everybody feared, subscribe and stay with the channel, because there are a great many more of them to tell.